It's not very often, but once in a while, I'll receive an invitation to check out a product that I've had a lot of curiosity about for quite some time, and I couldn't wait to test in person. Well, today I happened to finally get my hands on one of those products, so let's get it unpacked and check and see if it's worth the hype. So as many of you might know who have been following me for a while, I really hate mowing the grass. I hate it so much that for my college project, I built a remote control lawnmower, which I'll leave a link to in the description. Don't get me wrong, the remote control lawnmower was a great step forward. However, I still felt like it was missing something. That something was the ability to cut the grass on its own without me lifting a finger. I would soon find out this feature I was looking for was called autonomous mowing or robotic lawn mowing. Well, I'm slowly starting to look back into mowing related projects, so I'd like to give a big thanks to Sunseeker for inviting me to check out their robotic lawnmower called the Sunseeker L22 Plus Robotic Mower. So first, let's take a closer look at this charging station for the mower. It appears to have some of the boundary wire looped throughout the bottom of the base, which I'm assuming helps the mower detect it's near or on the charging base. Here we can find the charging connection the mower will connect to in order to recharge its internal battery. I noticed online that these caps on top of the charging base unscrewed to allow you to add what they call a garage or sunroof accessory. The charging base will likely be stationed in the yard somewhere, so I was happy to see that they included quite a bit of cabling in case your power outlet is a couple of feet away. Appearance-wise, in my opinion, this robotic mower has a really clean, user-friendly, and sleek design. It's eye-catching because of what it is, but not so much where it'll stand out too much while it's docked. Since the mower is made out of mostly heavy-duty plastic, it can give off a toy-like appearance, but it seems many robotic mowers have a similar approach in this class. The plastic probably makes it lighter, which I would assume increases the battery life. Looking inside what I call the mouth of the mower, we can find the charging terminals. On top of the mower near the rear, there's an emergency stop button that we'll test later in the video, and a rain sensor that should detect if it's raining and tell the mower to automatically head back to the charging base. Near the front, there's an adjustable dial which will allow you to change the cutting height from 1.6 inches to 3.2 inches. Jumping to the front of the robotic mower, we'll find two ultrasonic sensors that will detect and avoid obstacles without the lawnmower having to physically touch them. Between the two sensors is an LED light that serves multiple purposes that we'll look into more later in the video. I was also curious about how well the mower was built and if anything was loose or felt like it would fall apart after a few uses. For the most part, everything looked well secured, but only time will tell. Also, this control screen on top of the mower we'll look into more later in the video. The wheels on this robotic mower seem to be made out of some type of hard rubber, and they call them anti-slip wheels. They feel pretty durable, but I can't wait to see how well they'll handle the inclines in my backyard. Flipping the mower over, we can get a better idea for how the mower moves around and cuts the grass. Based on my small RC mower experience, I must say this type of swivel wheel is a great idea and design considering the terrain could vary quite heavily from one homeowner to the next. They also feel like they should last quite a while. Probably one of the most common but still interesting to me is the design concept for the cutting blade, or should I say blades. They use 3 razor sharp blades that provide a cutting width of 8.7 inches. As I rotate the cutting disc with my finger, you can see how the razor blades fan outward to work together to create a circular cutting motion. Also included in the box are spare blades if needed. Sunseeker mentioned after surveying over 10,000 yards, they designed the cutting system to float, which will automatically lift the cutting blades so the robotic mower has more clearance to navigate uneven terrain without getting stuck on different objects in the yard. Additionally, the grass clippings are directed back into the lawn, enriching the soil with nutrients and resulting in a greener and healthier yard. I decided to quickly test the mower in a small section of my property before setting it up for my entire backyard. For those wondering, the robotic mower is about 23 pounds, so moving it around by hand wasn't too much of a hassle. After finding a fairly flat spot to put the charging base, I worked on installing the required boundary wire, which is used to help create an invisible wall so the robotic mower knows where it's allowed to roam or cut and how to return back to the charging base. Installing the boundary wire is quite simple, and Sunseeker has a really easy to follow installation video on YouTube that walks you through just about everything you'll need to know. It's required to connect the boundary wire to the charging base, since the charging base emits a signal through the boundary wire that the robot is able to recognize and knows to stop and change its position, or as I mentioned before, to route itself back to the charging base. For the first 40 inches or so from the charging base, it is required that the boundary wire is positioned in a straight line. The boundary wire also needs to be about 12 inches away from any structures, walls, or flower beds, for example, since the robotic mower will slightly cross the boundary some when it's approaching it or returning back to the charging base. Sunseeker also included a cardboard ruler to help with keeping the spacing from these structures correct. To hold the boundary wire in place, for the model I have, they included 2 bags full of wire pegs, which I assume is enough to cover 250 meters, since that's the length of the boundary wire spool that came with this particular model. I was also a little worried about how well the wire pegs would hammer into my soil, since most of my soil is clay and rocky soil, especially in my backyard. Here on the side of my home, the soil is a little softer, so I didn't run into too many issues, but for areas that were a bit difficult to hammer in the wire pegs, I ended up using my power drill and a large drill bit to loosen up the soil some. Once the boundary wire was installed, I used my portable power station to provide temporary power to the charging base. If I install the boundary wire correctly, the power LED on the charging base should turn solid green after a few seconds. Next, it was time to finally fire up the robotic mower to see what it could do. To turn on the mower, you have to hold down the power button for a few seconds and then enter the default passcode. This code can be changed later if you want. Also, because of my video camera settings, it makes it seem like the LCD screen on the mower is flickering some, but in person it's not. To have the mower return to the charging base, you have to push the home button and then the OK button. So it seems once it finds the boundary wire, since it knows the boundary wire is attached to the charging base, it just follows that wire until it senses the charging base is close by. I thought it was pretty cool how it was able to realign itself properly to connect itself to the charging base. So far, it seemed to be doing what it's supposed to do, so I figured I could proceed with testing the primary mowing or cutting feature by pressing the start button first and then the OK button. I was impressed to see it stay within the boundary wire I installed and was working as advertised. At this point, I still had the cutting blades all the way up, so since my grass in this area is not extremely tall, it was still a little difficult to tell how well it would cut, but I plan to lower the blades once I move the mower to the backyard coming up shortly. Before we get to that, I wanted to test some other key features such as the mower's obstacle avoidance feature, which should prevent the mower from damaging flowers, outdoor furniture, and other objects in the yard. To quickly test the feature, I recruited my wife. Now, I don't recommend you try this at home, but I was glad to see the mower stop like it was supposed to in case kids or animals are around. The mower is also equipped with an auto stop feature when lifted, flipped, tilted, or senses a collision. They claim the robotic mower also has a lower ground clearance compared to others on the market, which reduces the risk of someone getting injured or objects in the yard getting scratched while the mower is active. It also seems to do well with traveling over small rocks or objects in its path. When it comes to hills or inclines, my property has a gradual incline which could be an issue for some robotic lawnmowers. As mentioned before, this mower comes with anti-slip wheels that will allow the mower to climb up to a 20-degree incline and mow uneven terrain. So I was curious to see how well this mower would handle my sloped backyard. Now they claim this is the quietest robotic mower in the world at less than 52 decibels while it's cutting grass. Based on the decibel readings from my smartphone app, it looks like they're not far off from what they reported. Now, I know my smartphone app cannot be compared to a professional sound meter, but based on my real world experience with this robotic mower, I can say I can barely notice it's turned on until I walk right up to it. So it's definitely not loud enough to wake up my neighbors. At this point, I was convinced I could probably go ahead and proceed with moving everything to my backyard and really putting this lawnmower through a true cutting and operation test to see how well it would hold up. Now the sun was blazing hot during this time of day, so I was thankful my wife was kind enough to provide some shade as I installed the boundary wire around the backyard. The mower also came with some base fitting nails to keep the charging base in place. After everything was installed, I installed Sunseeker's smartphone app, which takes this mower to another level and allows you to remotely control and see the status of the mower, set mowing schedules, change device parameters, and more from anywhere. We'll take a look at some of these features later in the video. Once the robotic mower was linked to the app, I tested to see if I could remotely start the mower by pressing the working button in the app. I also went ahead and adjusted the cutting height to the lowest setting so I could truly see how well it could cut the yard. Now, another feature I probably won't be able to test in this video is what they call Super Wi-Fi. Apparently, this allows the robotic system to connect to your home's network so that the mower can cover up to 8 acres. I will say, watching the robotic mower cut grass was like watching paint dry. I'm so used to a standard size push style lawnmower that has a 19 to 22 inch cutting deck and the rate at which I can finish cutting the lawn myself. This mower has an 8.7 inch cutting deck and moves at a crawling rate. However, I had to remind myself I'm dealing with a different type of mower class, and even though it moves at a slower rate, it should eventually have the yard cut, which will potentially reduce 70 to 80% of the lawn work my wife and I have to worry about. So I figured I'll be patient and give it a fighting chance to win me over. As with many other robotic lawnmowers and robotic vacuums, this mower automatically returns to the charging station when it's low on power. The mower can also be started using your home's automated system and integrated with Amazon Alexa or Google Home. This allows you to do things like start the mower only using your voice. Echo, set my robotic mower to work. Another unique feature is the intelligent mapping feature built into the app, which would display the size of your lawn and allow you to easily set the starting point for the lawnmower. Initially, I did run into a few issues trying to get this set up, which was partially due to how I routed my boundary wire into the charging base, but after reporting this issue to Sunseeker, they did mention they plan to make a better installation video that will hopefully prevent others from running into the same problems. Using a garden hose, I sprayed water on top of the robotic lawnmower to test the rain sensor. After a few seconds, sure enough, it detected the water and started to return to the charging base. While using the mower a little more, I thought it was a great idea to use the LED light at the front of the mower to let you know the current status of the mower. The LED light also lights up at night so you don't accidentally trip over the mower, and the light also isn't too bright where it would be a disturbance to my neighbors. After the mower had been running for about 30 or 40 minutes, I took my eyes off the mower, and when I came back to it, I had noticed it had overshot the boundary wire and was alarming. As I mentioned before, my backyard slopes downward quite a bit, and I think I pushed this mower past its limit since it had a hard time finding traction as it was going down the hill in this section. This issue probably occurred about 2 more times off camera, so I figured I probably was exceeding the 20-degree incline limit they mentioned, so I ended up moving my boundary wire forward some where the slope of my yard was not as extreme. However, I was happy to see the mower stopped on its own and didn't try to keep moving, which could have resulted in the mower ending up somewhere it's not supposed to be. After adjusting the boundary wire, I wanted to get a before shot of the yard before starting the cutting test again to see how the mower will perform this time around. The next day when I went to the backyard to check and see how things went, I was excited to see the mower did not have any issues staying within the boundary wire. Secondly, I was mostly excited to see how well the mower had cut the yard. I'll be honest, I set my expectations really low when I was watching this mower earlier, but after letting it do its thing for a few hours, I can definitely now see the true potential of this little workhorse. Now I will have to still use my weed eater to trim the edges of the yard, but I'll take that small task any day over having to do the primary lawn mowing. When it's time to clean the mower, since it's waterproof, it can easily be cleaned by lifting the mower and spraying it with water. So what's my final thoughts about this mower? I think overall, it's very simple to use, does what it's supposed to do, and does it well. Some of the issues I did run into where the mower passed the boundary wire was primarily due to me exceeding the rated limits, as once I readjusted the boundary wire, I reran the mower at least 3 times and it never had those issues again. Price wise, Sunseeker has an early bird special where this mower can be purchased for $1,199, which considering it will take care of most of your mowing needs isn't too bad in the long run. You can also find any discount codes and more information about this mower in the video description, and in case anyone is wondering, they also have other robotic models available for smaller yards. So overall, I'm impressed by this little robotic lawnmower. It is simple to use, but it does take a bit of time getting the boundary wire set up correctly, especially if you have a large yard. I'm also curious how well it will continue to perform as time goes on, but I'll keep you posted on any updates. Anyway, I hope this video was informative, and please share your thoughts or experiences with robotic lawnmowers in the comments below. Oh, before I forget, if you're just discovering this channel, you can watch some of our other videos by clicking the left video thumbnail, and for everyone else, YouTube thinks you might be interested in the video on the right. Well, that's all for now. I'll see you in the next one.